Hello, I'm JB Stillwell, and I'm fat. Or, as a good friend of mine pointed out, I have fat, because fat doesn't define who I am. It has taken me many years to come to terms with this word. I've been overweight all of my life. I would even joke that I was even big in the womb, which was not the case. I was a normal-sized baby, but it just seems that I've always been big. This is how I have lived my life for various reasons that we would need more than a short video to go into and address. But it's difficult when you're overweight, especially as a child, because we know that kids can be rather mean. And growing up in a society where if you are overweight, if you do have excess body fat, there is a negative connotation. There's even, negativity with the word. Growing up in American culture, when somebody says fat, they're not just saying a word, but it's taken as an insult. Sometimes even if you're speaking with your doctor and your doctor bluntly says you're fat, it can be devastating to a person who is overweight. And part of the reason why many of these things I have experienced myself is that in American society, in this culture, and this doesn't mean that everyone thinks this way, but if you just look at society in general, particularly how many things are portrayed in the media and how beauty is presented in magazines and movies and TV and so forth, fat has come to be equated with being unattractive, with being disgusting, with being unlovable. And so many people who are overweight and who grow up overweight tend to struggle with issues of self-image, of not having a very high opinion of yourself. And it took me a long time to come to terms with that and to realize that fat does not define who I am. But early on it was hard, particularly as a teenager. It was hard because, like I said, growing up, kids can be mean, kids will bully, and you really don't, especially when I grew up in the 80s and early 90s, there really wasn't any, positive portrayal of people who are big. So it wasn't until I got to college when I started to explore different ways of actually describing myself, such as big boned or curvy, Rubenesque, BBW. I would even jokingly, whenever training a class, say, I'm Chubbawumpkins, I'm chubby. And people would laugh. And like many people who struggle with self-image or other issues, humor can be, not always is, but humor can be a defense mechanism. Because subconsciously, I knew that if I said things like, well, coming through, watch out, Chubbawumpkin's trying to, get between you and the wall, so you could need to scoot your chair up a little bit, people would laugh. And subconsciously, I knew that as long as they were laughing, then they were distracted from any mean thoughts that they were thinking. Which, in some ways, looking back on it, is a little bit unfair, because I don't really know if they were thinking those mean thoughts. But growing up the way I did, always being big, and growing up in this society, that's how I perceived everything. And those of us who have done any studies in sociology or psychology, we know that perception is reality. And if we believe it to be true, it's true in its consequences. And unfortunately, even though I was laughing right along with them, inside, I really wasn't having a good time. Then I met my husband. And for those of you who know me, know that my husband is Indian. A different culture, grew up in different culture, and different ideas about body type. So the first time he called me fat, I thought we were going to have a big argument. So I was like, wait a minute, I know you've not been in the U.S. for very long, but do not call an American woman fat, because it will be taken as an insult. The word fat in this country is a judgment. It's not meant to be a nice thing. And he was truly confused. He was seriously confused by this because he didn't understand why it would be taken that way. Because in the culture he grew up in, saying that someone was fat was not a comment on whether they were attractive or unattractive. It was just a statement of fact. It was a descriptor of a person's body, just like you would say they have brown hair or green eyes. It didn't mean they were unattractive. It had nothing to do with whether they were beautiful. So after he and I had that conversation, I really started to think about how I perceived myself as far as the way my body looks. Now, there's a lot of people who are into body acceptance, fat acceptance, and so forth. And I was meddling, I guess you can say, in those social movements for a while. And to be completely honest, and this is just me, I was doing it as a way to make myself feel better about who I am and about the way that I look. And even, striking the drum saying, you can be fat and healthy, which is true. You can be fat and healthy. Like I said, I've been big all of my life. In my 20s, I was big, but yet I didn't have any health issues. And for me, and again, this is just for me, I'm not meaning to speak, for all fat people out there, but for me, although I was healthy at the time, I had a sense that that may not be true forever, because the long-term effects of having excess body fat didn't seem to me like it could be a good thing. For example, once you get older and your body starts breaking down a little bit and you start having creaks whenever you walk and your hips are hurting, it just doesn't seem to me that additional body fat would help that situation. Now, this is not to say that body fat causes those things. Unfortunately, there are many doctors and many people in the health industry who are pushing certain fads and so forth. Again, the diet industry is huge money-making business, so they can profit from it. But many of these conditions and many of the health issues that I have experienced myself are not caused by being fat. The fact of the matter is that the fat in itself tends to exacerbate the issue. So it doesn't cause the particular health issue, but it can make it worse. So I started to focus more on getting healthy and less on what I looked like, because I've gotten older, and as often happens when you get older, you tend to care less about what other people think. And I have a daughter and a family, and so it became more important to me that I look at my health and how my health was being affected. When I had my daughter, I had preeclampsia, which is something that we'll probably discuss in another video. But after I had her, the hypertension did not go away, and my health has been getting progressively bad since then. It's been on a downward trajectory, as my doctor would say. And about 2 years ago, I met with a functional specialist, a functional medicine specialist, to really look at my health, why I feel the way that I do, and become more body aware of the things that I put in my body and the things that I do, and how does it actually affect me health-wise. In this process, we did some genetic testing, and we also did an elimination diet. to try to figure out what foods actually cause me problems. Well, lo and behold, the genetic testing came back that I do have 2 gene mutations, which have contributed to some of the issues that I have had my entire life, and probably contributed to my weight, because my body does not 100% break down certain things because of these gene mutations, including amino acids and B vitamins and so forth. So to address that, since my body doesn't do that work, I now have to take several supplements and enzymes to do what my body should be doing. Not long after that, not even a year after that, I was diagnosed as having diabetes. Type 2 diabetes, which genetically, many people in my family have it. So I knew that in some ways it was only a matter of time before that genetic switch got flipped. And it's one of those things where you look at people who, hey, well, you're fat. If you would just lose weight, you wouldn't have diabetes. Well, if you think that, you don't understand diabetes very well. Because it's one of those things. Fat does not cause diabetes, but fat does make the diabetic condition worse. For example, there's plenty of people who are not fat who are diabetic. My father-in-law, he has diabetes, and he's a very slight man. A lot of it has to do with genetics and also your lifestyle, what you eat, how active you are. And we all know people who could eat the worst stuff all the time, nothing but junk food, but still be thin. Well, unfortunately, you put that stuff into your body long term, it's still going to impact your health whether you gain weight or not. So it gets back to that thing. Just because you're thin doesn't mean you're healthy, and just because you're fat doesn't mean you're sick. So for me, at that point, it became increasingly important to address my health and those foods that impact my body. Not with the consideration necessarily to lose weight, but I had this image of myself in the future being older and having to take a lot of medication. And I didn't want to do that. And I didn't want to have other difficulties with diabetes, such as retinopathy or neuropathy, numbness in my legs and not being able to walk very well. I didn't want that for me, and I didn't want that for my daughter, for her to have to deal with once I get older. So, in talking with my doctor about these things, like I said, we did the elimination diet and learned that my body does not fully process soy, gluten, or dairy. And then you add the diabetes onto it, then you have issues with carbohydrates and, foods with a high glycemic index. So my way of eating became quite restricted in the sense that I did not eat the way that I used to. But it was a long process. This wasn't something that, just changed overnight. It literally, as one of my friends put it, it literally was like a science experiment every single day of, eating, seeing how my body responded to it, cutting out the things that caused me problems, taking my blood sugar at certain points to see what caused my sugar to spike, what didn't, and so forth, until I got into a level lifestyle where I can eat until I'm full and don't have many issues. A side effect of that, though, I wasn't meaning to do this, but a side effect of that, of changing what I eat and also increasing my activity, is that I lost weight. To date, I have lost a total of 70 pounds. That's a little bit of an odd feeling. I still have fat, but I'm not sorry about it. I'm not sorry about it because the most important thing is my health. And the biggest triumph is that I just recently got the latest test for my A1C, and that's where they check a multi-week average of your blood sugar levels to see how you're progressing, and mine was 5.6, which is in standard range, which means effectively that my diabetes is in remission. And possibly in 3 months, I can go off medication altogether. It's a huge health win. Now, what does that mean for me? Does that mean that I can go back to the way that I used to eat? No. Unfortunately not, again, because of genetics and because how environment impacts these things. If I ever go back to the way that I used to eat, I'm going to end up right back where I was with the diabetes and possibly even worse. So this is a lifelong process. It's a lifelong change that I must continue in order to ensure that I live long enough to see my daughter grow up, which is the whole point. Thank you for listening. I hope you learned a little bit more about me, and hopefully you will feel even more comfortable about discussing your own health and body image issues so that you can grow as a person, which means not having your identity being defined as how much fat you have. Thanks.